I'm Mark Gagan and you're listening to the Voice of Insurance podcast, produced in association with Advantage Go. Pick and choose your own best-of-breed insurtech and data providers with Advantage Go's ecosystem. Today's guest is someone who is running a business that is moving so fast that every time he comes back on the show, we have an enormous amount to talk about. And this time is no different. Today, Jeff Radke, CEO of Accelerant, is talking to me after a transformational 12 months that has seen his young business continue its heightened growth and IPO on the New York Stock Exchange. At the Voice of Insurance, we've been lucky enough to follow Accelerant's story at first hand since Jeff's first appearance 4 years ago. The proposition is as tantalising as it's always been. Good MGAs need stable capital, strong underwriting insights, and ultra-efficient processes, while insurers, reinsurers, and other capital providers want access to stable, diversified portfolios of profitable insurance risk on a meaningful scale. Accelerant's job is to connect everything and everyone up and make sure everybody in the chain can make money and be happy. It sounds simple, but in a regulated industry, this can be anything but simple in practice. As Accelerant's platform grows and becomes the conduit for low single-digit billions in premium volume via over 250 member MGAs, its more mature state is coming into view. The business is evolving to become something far more like a genuine intelligent insurance exchange and underwriting management platform than a mere fronting or hybrid carrier. This conversation is the best and most transparent I've had with Jeff so far. Talking to Jeff, it's easy to see why so much business has flowed in Accelerant's direction. Jeff has had huge tech-enabled trends on his side, but he also has charisma in abundance. But then so do many in our business. It's only when that charisma is combined with the deep knowledge of someone who has sat at almost all points of the insurance and capital value chain in his career that it becomes such a powerful combination. Listen on, this is a very rich conversation that I can highly recommend to anyone interested in what large swathes of the insurance market are going to look like over the next decade and beyond. Enjoy the podcast. Jeff, welcome back to the Voice of Insurance. It's really great to talk to you again.
It's great to be back. How are you?
I'm really, really well. Well, how are you, more importantly? Because obviously every time we have a gap, when you have a business that's quite young and it's growing really fast, the business is so different and we have so much to talk about since we last spoke because, time moves faster for you. You're going hell for leather. Of course, since we last spoke, you've become a public company. That's a big deal. So give us the rundown of that. What was that like? And what's that given you? And obviously, how's that changed your role?
Well, I think it's an obvious question, but a good question, Mark. How has it changed things? It was a pretty important milestone for Accelerant, for the people that work at Accelerant, but also, or maybe especially, for our MGA members and the risk capital partners that were designed to make successful. It was a milestone, and it gives us a number of different advantages: permanence, independence, clarity of purpose. But really, I'd be fibbing if I said we got back to our desk later on that day and got to work. It was the next day. But it was the next day, Mark. We started worrying about our members and how to make them more successful and how to make more underwriting profit for our risk capital partners the very next day. So an important milestone. When I say important, the reason for that, I think, is, again, independence, permanence, and clarity of purpose as a risk exchange.
Obviously, you're the CEO of a private company that's building away. You're moving really fast. Now you're the CEO of a public company. You're looking towards your next quarterly results and all that kind of stuff. Has it changed your life? And also the way you're focused as well?
It's changed my life. It's changed probably 3 or 4 other people that work at Accelerant. Fundamentally changed their jobs anyway. The good news, 600 and something odd people, it hasn't changed their lives. And let me explain what I mean by that, Mark. As a private company, one of the things that I have always really enjoyed is being as transparent as you can possibly be with your bosses about the strategy and what's going well and what you're worried about and what's next and how you're thinking about the market. And we try to bring as much of that as we can to being public. And I say as much of that as you can. There are constraints that everyone knows, right? Reg FD, et cetera, in terms of disclosure and keeping non-public information confidential. But I think those are the edges. I think what's really important is that Accelerant continue to be the clarion call on transparency, right? Here's our business. Here's how it works. This is what we're doing. This is what we're going to do next. In baseball, to use an American sports analogy, sort of calling your shot, like say, pointing to the left field fence and saying, that's where we're going to try and hit it. As a new company, Mark, we've got a lot of work to do and we can always get better. making sure that our shareholders and prospective shareholders, as well as the analysts and everyone in the community, understands how we're thinking about the business, how we're trying to grow that risk exchange. And I'm not sure you can hurry that. It's a process.
And also that model has evolved. I mean, at the beginning, when we first spoke a few years ago, you'd say, you're an enabler of MGAs and you'll do that by any means possible. And the best way of enabling that at that time in that market would be, we need to be a carrier ourselves so we can provide them with long-term paper. Obviously, we have those relationships with our reinsurers, with other capital, but we're providing that permanence. And also we're taking all the analytics side of things out of the equation as well. And so we're just basically becoming a place where a top underwriter can come and plug in and kind of know that Jeff's taking care of all the other stuff. And I can concentrate on being a good underwriter and growing my business in whatever particular niche I'm in or whatever it is that I'm really good at. You sort of evolved from there, haven't you, really? So run us through it.
We spend a lot of time and energy and effort making sure that the value proposition for our members remains as strong as ever. And what is that value proposition? Long-term, stable capacity that lets them get on with it. As you said, Mark, their real business. Data and analytics, which make them much, much better underwriters, meaning they know where to grow and where not to grow. And that has driven historically, and we believe it'll continue to drive really, really high quality growth inside each of our members. And then the last thing that we say is our job is to facilitate our members monetizing every opportunity they have. So they've got distribution relationships, they've got experience in selecting risks and underwriting. All sorts of opportunities come out of that. And what we hear from our member MGAs over and over again is, I'm capturing about 80% of the value or 70% of the potential value because I can't find anyone that'll do this little product thing, which would just round out our proposition. And what we try and do is be flexible and find a way to fill it in and so that all their opportunities can be taken advantage of. And then from the risk capital side, Mark, because we always have to remain balanced, we're taking this portfolio that's really, really diverse. You take that low loss ratio and that scale and that diversification, and that's what's really valuable to our risk capital partners, whether they're really big reinsurers that are trying to diversify away U.S. catastrophe risk or U.S. big liability risk, or whether they're institutional investors that are trying to diversify away from interest rate risk or stock market risk. So on both sides, we're trying to deliver what they need.
But also, I suppose since we last spoke, you've probably brought in more first-party insurers, risk capital partners, or how you'd like to describe it.
I'm delighted to say that we've got over 15 insurance companies, including the ones we own, over 15 that are operating on the risk exchange as insurers. And generally speaking, Mark, I think you know this, but for your audience, that splits into three broad categories, at least the way we think about it. The insurance companies we own, and we really use those, as you pointed out, Mark, as a conduit to bring business to those reinsurers and institutional investors acting as sort of SPV reinsurers. They need that conduit from a regulatory perspective. So we don't retain very much risk at all. Just under 10% is where we are now. So we're using the insurance companies we own mainly as a conduit. There's another host of companies that call themselves hybrid fronters, and they retain a relatively low amount of business, 10 to 15%. And the balance goes out to those same risk capital partners that we talked about. And again, really valuable to have multiple conduits because of regulatory reasons and competitive reasons. And then there's a group of more traditional insurers that are writing the business because they're excited about writing the business on the risk exchange because of the control that the risk exchange and Accelerant gives them, the granularity of the data, et cetera, all sorts of advantages. And they tend to either retain all that risk or look after themselves in terms of their reinsurance arrangements. But you said something really important, Mark. The way we get that business to our risk capital partners is a contract of reinsurance.
Yes.
But we don't think about it the way I historically have over the past 30 years of my career. We're not buying reinsurance as a hedge. We're not trying to take out the peaks of our exposure. We're just sharing that business.
You think much more of a quota share in the way that I used to broker Spanish business into London. It said reinsurance on the slip, but it wasn't really reinsurance. It was actually insurance. And there was a bit of co-insurance, and you expected that. And that, the local market retained something and they were fully in touch with that risk, but we were writing it all together really. And probably these days it would be much more likely to be written as insurance because of the way that freedom of services within the EU has advanced, and it would be written by Lloyd's Brussels or whatever. But back in those days, it hadn't really developed that much. In the mid-90s, it hadn't quite existed. So it's much more like that.
Exactly. But the ethos is very different, right, Mark? Yeah. I know when you were an underwriter, you did the Spanish business where you felt like you were doing insurance. And then you also wrote reinsurances where you knew
it was real reinsurance. Yeah.
You were getting just a portion of the exposure. And what your cedent was doing was trying to optimize its retained portfolio.
Yeah. There's kind of pure reinsurance and kind of, insurance by another name. But it's very interesting, that relationship. So there's other carriers again, but they're on the Accelerant platform. And so effectively you are charging them to be on that platform. And also perhaps with those other carriers, do you have a lot of commonality in terms of the reinsurance relationships that you all have? Presumably somebody might be, they're backing your underwriting, Jeff, the one that's on your owned balance sheets. Do you get a lot of crossover? Are they also backing some of your other partners?
Almost always. And when you say some overlap, what I would say, Mark, is it's rare when we get differences. It's very rare. It's generally a panel of risk capital partners that share in pari passu slices of the portfolio, regardless of which insurance company was the issuing carrier. And the important distinction there, Mark, is the component of our risk capital partners that are traditional insurance companies, they quite often retain that risk.
Yeah. And what are they buying into there with you? Are they buying that distribution that you have because you've got the members?
I think they're buying distribution, so access to the business. Yeah. They're buying the platform. And when I say the platform, what I really mean is they're buying that transparency of data where at a moment's notice, on my phone, I can look up how the Mark MGA is performing, both in terms of what's your renewal hit ratio, is your loss emergence better or worse than expected, how much of your portfolio is vacant property versus more traditional risks. All that stuff is available immediately. And we're told that that's very atypical of other insurance companies. Certainly my experience before Accelerant, I never worked anywhere where I had that degree of transparency or control.
So do you think at some point you could retire your insurance companies because you won't need them anymore because you've become a far more pure marketplace, a genuine risk exchange as you're describing it, where it's all your smarts and your access and you're just the glue that's holding this whole thing together. And of course, none of them can do it without you. And you're this essential sort of utility in the middle.
I think we're there, Mark. We own 5 insurance companies that retain very little risk. Essentially, it's just the regulatory requirements. And as we hit scale and the portfolio gets bigger and bigger, the insurance companies frankly don't matter much at all. And increasingly, we're seeing that with investors. They understand that the third-party insurance companies are growing bigger and bigger as a proportion. But importantly, the investors that understand our model best understand that whether we own it or we don't own it, to a large degree, these things are just pipes to the ultimate risk partner. On our first earnings call, there was some consternation about Hadron as one of our risk exchange insurers. In fact, as of the second quarter of this year, they were our largest risk exchange insurer. And I think investors and analysts, less so analysts, I think investors were a little bit concerned about that. And I think their concern came from the fact that Altamont, our primary financial sponsor, also was the owner of Hadron and related party. And while it was disclosed, was it fully understood? Perhaps not. I think what I'd say is that there's not a lot of smoke here. There's not even a lot of noise. Hadron is indeed one of our risk exchange insurers. We pay them market rates, 5-ish%, just like everyone else from a fronting perspective. They will become a smaller and smaller percentage going forward. Switching has costs, right? Those costs are mainly borne by our MGA members. If they have to keep switching paper, it's hard for them, expensive, and not a great look to their distribution source. So we're going to do this responsibly, but everyone should understand that Hadron is a valuable partner, and we've got 7 other valuable partnerships, and Hadron will grow more slowly. In other words, it will mix down, and there are many, many different conduits that we could rent, i.e. many, many hybrid fronting businesses that we can do business with.
In terms of those partners that you've got there, the ones that are side by side with you on the insurance side, are they buying into your analytics platform as well? Or are some of them saying, well, I don't really need that, I've got my own thing?
No, the exact opposite. Two different insurance companies have said, me accessing the Accelerant portfolio on the platform has been great, and I want to continue to grow that. Is there a way that I could put my non-Accelerant business on the Accelerant platform?
Right.
Because it gives us such better control, et cetera, and all those good things that we talked about. So it goes the other way. People tend not to opt out of the platform.
That's where you're adding the most value, I suppose. This is your real métier, isn't it? This is what you're really here for.
Yeah, splitting up a value proposition is always difficult, right? So there's access, there's the analytics, and then there's the human expert service model. And all three, I think, are important.
And then we've got regulatory reasons often why some things have to flow through one thing or another. Obviously, for example, if you don't have a license in that state or that territory, then fair enough. We know it's going to go.
That's
or
right.
somebody wants AA minus paper, that's got to be AA minus. And if you haven't got that, you haven't got that. And then obviously wouldn't expect one of your own in-house insurers to have a AA minus, for example. But is there any other logic as to which path risk takes through the exchange?
You hit those pretty well, Mark. There's regulatory constraints. We need to find an insurance company that has a license to sell workers' comp in Nebraska. Where that came from, I don't know. And that's the way it is, right? Then the second thing after regulatory is a two-sided coin. On one side, the rating and size. Some businesses, is much more credit sensitive than other business. And then the other side of that coin is appetite. There are insurance companies, traditional insurance companies, that have strong points of view about what they want or what they don't want. So you have to combine that. And then the third thing is competitive tension. So everyone is looking to diversify their portfolio. So if you had an insurance company that had a particularly large amount of, Nebraska workers' comp, they wouldn't get excited about Accelerant providing them access to more of the same. What they would get excited about is artisan contractors in California. How do I access that? That would be very valuable to them. Generally speaking, for many of our insurance company partners, risk exchange insurers, they're not companies that you would say are experts in the specialty market because they feel like they can do that themselves. They are insurance companies that were relatively underrepresented in the specialty space. And they view Accelerant as a experience proven way to access a specialty portfolio at scale with the data and analytics that is really expensive to build on your own, really expensive.
That sounds like someone who's speaking from experience there, Jeff.
Yeah. Jeez, I am.
Of course, the trouble with all this technology investment is you think you're done by the end of year 3 or whatever it is. And then, of course, but then you have to pay a certain amount every year to keep it going. And then about every 3 years, you have to rebuild it and start again anyway. Or it feels like it.
That's right. And you have to remember that every new feature or every new capability is taken for granted in 9 months. There must be an equivalent of a Moore's law of how quickly we expect. Yeah.
And it requires maintenance as well, doesn't it? So you keep putting new buildings everywhere, and then after 5 years, the paint starts peeling, and you need to start sort of revarnishing all the doors.
Right. That's
so
right.
Yes.
And I have to say, if you look at dollars, Mark, in all honesty, if you look at dollars of investment, the maintenance costs for us sort of pale in comparison to the investments that we're making in pushing the edge of the envelope. And you know where I'm going.
Yeah,
I think we got this part exactly right. We said, boy, do we need data. Boy, do we need high quality data. And boy, we don't need a trillion rows of the same stuff. What we need is really broad data, lots of risk attributes. And we need to set up a platform that's designed that way, which is completely atypical of insurance systems, right? As you remember, Mark, your policy administration system, it has
we're looking at about 5 things. Yeah.
5 things. And that's how many you get to store, right? And I'm not sure what our number was. At the IPO, I remember we have 21,000 unique risk attributes. I'm sure that's gone up by now.
Because you might actually find the one that actually makes people top quartile. That one.
Yeah.
If you don't measure it, you can't test the hypothesis, can you?
And you start to get really, really interesting, curious things where, hey, growing north of the river is incredibly profitable, and growing south of the river is not because of property things.
And we don't know why. There's another factor.
Demographic. It's because of which football club they support, Mark, to be honest with you.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. There's people from the wrong side of the tracks. Yeah, exactly.
Well-behaved versus less well-behaved. Yes.
Yes, we all know that. I'm always asking people about AI. It seems like a really good time to talk about it now. Because I've seen this in London. Some of the early movers who've made the investment are then, having built a platform, are now saying, well, showing that to other people to say, you might want to use this because I've spent the time building it and I've proven it to be successful. Because, of course, if you can collect 25,000 columns, you really need something incredibly powerful to be able to really crunch that, because you're getting beyond human capability at that point. Has that been your best application of AI, is to really get through those 25,000 columns and say...
So there are three main value drivers, the way we think about AI. And I'd like to say machine learning and AI, if that's okay, Mark, because I think a lot of this is machine learning. The star of the show, without a doubt, is what we call insurance intelligence, which is which claim is more likely to have a subrogation, which claim is more likely to be litigated or blow up, so that you focus on the right claims. Should you grow north of the river or south of the river? Should you write in an affluent area or a less affluent area? All that insurance intelligence is really sexy stuff and gets insurance weirdos like me really excited. And that's the heart of it, right? Where we're building risk scores for all of our products. And what that does is it, along with our member MGA's expertise, it lets them grow much more profitably and much more quickly. But then there are two other areas which I think might have a bigger impact in the end on more people's lives, not to be too grandiose. But the first one is, how do you make the platform work more efficiently? And I don't know what the right analogy is, Mark, but maybe I'll use airplane travel. Do you remember when we first started working, what a pain it was? The paper tickets, I mean, just the whole thing, and checking in, and how did you get through customs? Everything was so hard compared to the way it is now. And what we're seeing on the platform is AI is just taking away friction. The best example is probably underwriting referrals, which used to be all these emails ping-ponging around. Yeah. And now it's on the platform where AI is helping out our members fill in what they have to fill in, or it loads it from their system. I think our members told us that we're saving like 12,000 hours a month of member time just on underwriting referrals. So making the platform run smoothly takes a lot of friction out of the system. And then the third pillar is operations, and how does the money move, and how does the paper move, and how does the reporting move? We are getting so much faster by applying AI to those roles and being less reliant on the people turning the handle. Yeah, I'm sure you hear this all the time. What we're doing is we're allowing our people to step back, design the process, monitor the process, but not do the process. And I don't know whether you call that 10 times faster, 5 times faster, but speed is what matters. People talk about cost. I think that's wrong. I think the real differentiator is, how fast can we get value from an insured to our MGA member to the risk capital partner, and how much friction can we take out? Because that's where we really want to compete. That's sort of the vector that we'd like to compete on, because we think it's such an important thing.
The straight through processing, that, and also that ability to pass that risk around really quickly without any friction, without having to sort of, create a new submission, take another 10 points commission off, and end up with no value at the end of it.
3 weeks and 3 weeks. Yeah. And
the lack of information by the time you get to the retro. And of course, you've lived in the retro world, Jeff. You kind of know how little information you may have by the time it gets to you.
What is it? I don't know what I don't know.
A name. There's a name on the slip, and that's about it. And it's like, do I like that name or not? And that's about it. And then you got to rate online, and that's about it. So it's good to have that conversation, because we can see the direction of travel that you're on. Yeah, again, to be that glue that's holding all that thing together. But not, glue's not a bad analogy, isn't it? More like the oil, that's like letting it fly around quickly,
Or are we the conductors? Are we the wires that are connecting and letting it move, sort of like electricity? And similarly, I don't know much about transmission and distribution of electricity, but I'm sure it's way more complicated than I think it is, right?
Yes.
But it just disappears. You turn on the light switch and it works almost all the time. That's not a terrible analogy for what we're going for, right? Which is, inside, underneath that platform, is there a wickedly complex regulatory, operational data thing that has to get connected and has to self-heal itself because the information flows change all the time, et cetera? Do we have to do all that? Yeah. And when we're doing our job best, It's completely invisible. And we're just the rails on which specialty insurance runs. And no one thinks about all that underlying complexity because we take care of it.
You're already pretty geographically diverse. You started over in the UK, been in the EA, Canada. Should we expect any more? Is that kind of you're done in terms of what you've built? Or obviously, there are other continents available?
Certainly not done. And I guess the way we think about it, Mark, is you can call them MGAs if you want to be more philosophical. Maybe what they are is just the natural extension of what we see happening everywhere in every industry throughout the world. And more specifically, as technology becomes cheap enough that it's no longer a huge hurdle, the cost, what you're seeing is empowered individuals are breaking off from these big monolithic institutions. Think about investment advisors. Great analogy, right? 1985, for sure. They were all tied to the big banks, the big institutions, because they had all the product. Now that's been completely disaggregated, right? And you've got individuals with relationships helping people pick the right investment strategies and investment products for them. We are such big believers that that specialty underwriter inside, call it an MGA, that doesn't really matter. What matters is it's a bet on the individual owner operator. And we'd make that bet in the countries that we're in today. You know them as well as I do, Mark. Latin America, Australia, New Zealand, Asia, all these areas, I think we're going to continue to see the typical insurance setup disaggregate. And once it disaggregates, what the world needs, I'll be presumptuous enough to say, what the world really needs is a quick and efficient connection from capital to that risk expert.
Yeah. You're talking to a podcaster, that, 100 years ago, all journalists were effectively tied to a rich person who owned a printing press because it was very expensive technology and the distribution just to put newspapers around. You need big investment. Right. And now look, here I am. It's not a capital investment to become a podcaster. It's just it's a kind of leap of faith. It's more important the fact that I know you well enough to ask you to come on the show and you might say yes. And that's good. That's all I need. Whereas before I would have needed a printing press and everything else.
And the analogies or the similar situations are everywhere. That's one of the reasons we're so excited about it is this isn't some tenuous idea like maybe this will work. We're seeing it across every country, across every industry. And what's peculiar, perhaps, is why did it take me and my colleagues so long to figure this out?
It wasn't very long ago that every time you moved something through someone's hands, you had another paper file and another 10% cost and another 3 months delay before you even saw the premium. And that's just the way it used to be, right?
It's absolutely true. We try to say out loud internally at Accelerant, we try to say when 3 years ago we couldn't have done this, almost always we're talking about technology, sometimes regulation, but technology. That's a really powerful statement. Like 3 years ago, this would have been impossible, what we just did. It gives you a sense of how fast the world is changing.
Yeah, this is really interesting conversation, but I suppose we better get down to earth a little bit. And the great thing is obviously you can see so much through the platform. Of course, as the platform gets bigger, it's that virtuous circle. You get to see more and more. And now you're in the billions of dollars of premium coming through the platform.
That's right.
I mean, when I talk to everybody, the global specialty insurance market, things are coming off the peak, coming off a very nice peak. So are you in a moment where you're feeling that the growth is going to be harder to come by for those individual underwriters at least? But I suppose you in the aggregate, I presume you've still got plenty more members out there who are not members yet, who you'd like to be members.
Future members. Absolutely. A couple of different things, Mark. Depending on the class of business, you're either seeing a very quick deceleration of rate increases. We tend not to write this business, but in the larger property, what I'm hearing is actually rate reductions. That tends not to be our portfolio business, but clearly the tailwind that we've had on rates is getting weaker. The one thing I would say, Mark, is on our portfolio, the good times were about an 8% rate increase. I think there was a year we had 13, and we were a much smaller business then, but I think we had 13. I guess my point is the small to medium-sized business, you don't get the 40% up and the 40% down like you do on big property or reinsurance, where I used to spend more of my time.
Yeah, because we're all the actions at the margin and the margin's fluctuating all the time. Yeah,
exactly. So the rates didn't help us out all that much, but that 8% is going down for sure.
Yeah.
So the good news is if you think of our growth rates, which have been way, way higher than 8, about 80% of our growth every year comes from existing MGA members growing their portfolio. This is unscientific. About a third of an existing member's growth comes from new products. 2/3 comes from just grinding it out better on a product that has been with Accelerant at the beginning of the year. We see no slowdown other than rate moderation. We see no slowdown in our members using the data and the insights we provide. We see no slowdown in our members being able to grow really nicely and really, really profitably. And then new members, as you said, Mark, the MGA world is gigantic. They're constantly creating new ones. But on top of that, there's many, many, many really talented underwriters that are not yet Accelerant members, but they will be in time.
Obviously, you've been a first mover and you've got to scale quickly, which is, I think, is always a good thing. Perhaps with the wider market not growing quite so easily organically, we've had an explosive amount of growth in the hybrid carrier space. Then, your peer group has got quite a big number in it. At this stage in the cycle, we've already seen carrier MGA. Of course, the brokers are always taking each other over. That's fine. But the carrier M&A started to kick in. Do you think that would be logical to see consolidation within your space for those that haven't necessarily got to scale coming to have a word with you? And of course, now you've got a currency, you've got Accelerant stock. Or do you think it would be different from that, be more Darwinian to say, well, actually, they're just going to wither on the vine and we're going to be here and we're going to carry on growing that way?
I think in the beginning of your question, you were sort of saying that hybrid fronting space.
Yes. You have a lot more peers than when we first spoke.
Yeah, that's right. 26, someone said?
It's a lot, yes.
And again, for us, that's an enabler. The main show for us is the risk exchange, right? The data and technology enabled risk exchange. That's the main business. And I guess what I would say is I think the market needs quite a few hybrid front. I don't know whether 26, how could someone say 26 is clearly too many or too few? They're all getting business. They're all growing well. If you look at the statistics, and we do business with many of them. We utilize many of them to be that conduit to get the business to our risk capital partners. So I don't see us as an acquirer of those hybrid fronting balance sheets. Rather, I see us as an enabler of their business model, right? Because they're very, very useful to us in the whole risk exchange. Again, really critical function to get that business to those reinsurers and institutional investors.
Yep. So it sounds like it's more evolutionary rather than, strategic. And I suppose if you acquired another carrier, it doesn't sound like you've got strategic logic to do that. So, well, I've already made all the investments in the technology. How would I ever integrate their version of that? Because it would be just probably incompatible.
I think that's right. And I also think most hybrid fronting companies, I would say, do not over-index on investment on the data side. Their business model tends to be a little bit tight on the margin to do those kinds of investments. But that's sort of a sideshow, Mark. There's not a strategic reason for us to own more insurance companies than we own. We love the fact that several of these hybrid fronting companies are important partners with us in terms of being risk exchange insurers. And business relationships are really important to us. So it's not that we swap in or out partners. That's not true. However, a hybrid fronting company is what it is. It's a conduit.
Well, how's the wind blowing generally in terms of reinsurer appetite? Sometimes they're sort of sucking premium towards you. They're pulling that premium towards you. They're probably on the phone. Hey, Jeff, how can I get more? How can I have more income from you guys? This is great. I would like some more of it. I'm ready to take it, whatever you've got. At other times, of course, they're saying, we're kind of looking to offload a bit. We'll let you know kind of how we're feeling. How's that, their general appetite affecting the dynamics of the flow and also what somebody is expected to retain, for example?
Sure. We've been incredibly fortunate in a number of ways. One of the most important ways is very early on, we had some foundational relationships that we started with risk capital partners, these professional reinsurers that are really, really powerful. Some of them have been nice enough to give us permission to use their name. So we have Allianz Re, we have QBE. These are really big, solid relationships for us. And what they have said to us pretty consistently throughout our whole existence, so 2020 to date, what they've said, Mark, is provided that the performance of the portfolio remains similar to what it has been, we will take what you will offer. And if you think about it, Mark, it's not catastrophe exposed, our portfolio, right? There are no big limits. It's this nice, smooth, low volatility book of business. It makes all the sense in the world for these big organizations to say, as much of it as you can send in, because there's no way you can send me enough of this ballast business to overwhelm the windstorm exposure I have in the US. So we'll take as much as you can give us, as long as it stays high quality. And
Yeah.
the data and analytics are our job and our tool to make sure it stays really profitable and attractive.
And I suppose you're sending them that business, and each incremental new dollar of premium you're sending them is really not incurring any capital charge, or very, very little.
Very, very little.
It's like a free ride, isn't it? A free hit, effectively. I mean, it's very capital efficient, shall we say?
That they'd agree with. Free, probably not.
There's no such thing as a free hit. We know that, but you know what I mean. It's pretty efficient, isn't it? Because you're giving them something very diversified.
That's why the portfolio is so valuable, and that's why the risk capital is willing to pay us a fee to source, manage, and monitor that portfolio on their behalf, because it's valuable, because the profits are good, and it's even more valuable because the capital consumption is very low.
And obviously, generally, do you think this is something that's going to play into your favor? I've seen some interesting analysis of the MGA sector. We know what we're like in insurance. When we see anything grow quickly, anyone with a grey beard will raise their eyebrow and say, well, let's just see how it goes.
Yep.
So I've seen some analysis to say that some of the MGA sector hasn't necessarily outperformed on its underwriting, or certainly it hasn't done any better than the rest of the P&C industry. But I suppose your results are transparent. So do you think that's something that's going to play into your hands in terms of, you keep your net loss ratio at 52, everyone's going to be happy, and you're able to do that. And if others aren't able to do that, then that business is going to have to find its way into your platform, because it's going to be the one that is supported. Because also, presumably, you have a better way of identifying what is the good business and what is the bad business.
Yeah, that's the key. What we talk about quite a bit with our members is we're all price takers. The insurance landscape is fractured enough that we're all price takers. There's a market price and it's on offer, and you can either say yes or no.
It's just you need to know when to say yes and when to say no. Yeah.
Right. And the market price, by definition, is too much for half the risks and too little for half the risks. And the question is, can you more often than not figure out which camp this particular risk falls into? And how do you do that? You do that with experience and cunning and hard lessons that you learned. And our MGAs have all those things. But now they've got a new tool, which is some of those 21,000 unique risk attributes, giving them a clue about attributes that maybe aren't obvious to them. So we're really bullish that we're going to continue to be able to help our members select well and perform very well. To the extent that market loss ratios deteriorate, will our loss ratio deteriorate? Probably. Not as much, but probably. But also keep in mind, Mark, small to medium-sized business, the bad years aren't that bad. The good years aren't that good, by the way, right? You don't post a 30% loss ratio ever on our business, nor do you post a 40. But trying to get to like 65, that's pretty hard. Historically, that doesn't happen very often on the small to medium-sized business.
Yeah, because there's such high numbers, you're moving very slowly.
And the expenses are so high for the traditional industry that they can't compete it down. I worked somewhere where we did some cost analysis. One of these lean guys came in, and we figured out, fully loaded with all our vice presidents and all our assistant vice presidents, it costs $254 to mail a policy.
Yeah, don't do that.
You can't cut the price too much when it costs $254 to mail a policy.
In the last 3 or 4 years, a parallel to your growth, we've seen a real adoption, because people were pretty skeptical to start with, but a huge embracing of the portfolio underwriting, algorithmic underwriting, all sorts of things. Again, in similar sort of space as you. And it's been, amazing. We were talking about brokers facilitizing 30% of the portfolios without batting an eyelid. And again, and underwriters backing that and seeing the benefits, the cost benefits, the capital benefits of doing things in a more efficient way. And it doesn't mean you're not underwriting. You're still underwriting. You're just underwriting on a portfolio basis rather than individual risk basis. It's really interesting.
That's right. That's kind of the advertising tagline for Accelerant's Risk Exchange, which is you don't need all that stuff.
Yeah.
Speaking to the industry, you spend 16% of premium on all this stuff and you don't need it.
Removing those $254 mail checks that you have to.
You're not kidding.
If you keep doing it, yeah, I'm sure if you do it in London, it's going to be $500, whatever you do. I mean, insurance never seems to be done in any cheap cities. It's all London, New York, Zurich, and go and buy a coffee and it costs you $10, whatever you do, whichever place you go to.
Let's not forget Bermuda. You can't leave Bermuda out of that topic.
Yeah, Monaco, and goodness knows wherever else. Yeah. Jeff, I've come to the end of my questions. I think the amount that's changed since we last spoke is amazing. So We need to make sure that it's 2026 and we're talking. Well, of course, the great thing is that you will have 4 different quarterly results between now and then.
Yes.
I can do all my homework because of all that transparency that the being on the stock exchange is going to force upon you, which is fantastic. It just means that we'll have a more advanced conversation where I'll have to come up with better questions. So
I look forward to it. October of 26. It's a date.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Not at all. Cheers. Great to see you, Mike. Thanks.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, don't forget to subscribe or leave a like or a review or recommendation on whatever podcast platform you used to access this program. These really help get the word out. Before we go, just a quick reminder that advertising slots are available here and in other places in the Voice of Insurance podcasts. Podcasting is the fastest growing medium and attracts a high quality audience of key decision makers. It's also an intimate medium where you, the listener, are right in the room with me and the interview subjects. Needless to say, that means it's a great way of getting your message out directly to an audience because you know you've got their full attention. It's also very cost effective. So get in touch with Mark at thevoiceofinsurance.com to find out how you could be speaking directly to the industry. The Voice of Insurance podcast is produced in association with Advantage Go, enabling enterprise-scale underwriting through a single pane of glass. Voice of Insurance is produced by me, Mark Gagan. Music was written by Anna Gagan and produced by Carlos Gagan. Check out more podcasts and written comment pieces at www.thevoiceofinsurance.com.